Dreamcast is one of the most peculiar game consoles I've ever talked about. After the pitiful launch of Sega Saturn, it was faced with an incredibly tough task to not only compete with consoles from Sony and Nintendo, but also to restore Sega's tarnished reputation. And even though the end of this story is somewhat predictable, Dreamcast itself deserves attention, which it will be given in today's video. Last time, when we talked about Sega, the company was in quite a sticky situation to say the least. A series of poor decisions resulted in Saturn not being able to successfully compete with the first PlayStation, even though it had every chance to do so. As always, I advise you to check out the previous video from our playlist for some context. Saturn's failure resulted in both financial losses and personnel reshuffles up to the replacement of Sega's CEO. All of this naturally affected the company's reputation, and something had to be done about all these problems. The development of the new console began back in the times of Saturn. By the way, rumors about the new console also had a negative effect on Saturn's sales. As for the future of Dreamcast, Sega would not even been Sega if everything went smoothly. Two versions of the console were being developed simultaneously, and one of them was cancelled because of 3DFX, the company responsible for the graphics chip. They and Sega signed the contract, all details of which went public when 3DFX put its shares on the market. Sega's management was furious, and the contract was terminated. As if there weren't enough problems, 3DFX took the matter to court, but at least this problem was settled peacefully. On the other hand, Sega finally learned from its mistakes. As a result, they managed to make Dreamcast both relatively cheap and surprisingly performative for its time. A total of 8 MB of video memory with anti-aliasing and other graphical effects gave a picture so good that in some cases even PS2 games looked worse than their Dreamcast versions. The console allowed the use of up to 4 unusually shaped joysticks. The form was explained by the possibility to insert a device called VMU, Visual Memory Unit, into the joystick. It served as a memory card, a standalone mini console with simplistic games, and as an add-on to the joystick. For example, in Resident Evil, the VMU screen showed the character's health bar. It is worth noting that PS1 later also got a similar device called Pocket Station. However, on both consoles, it was more of a funny accessory rather than a necessary component. Another thing worth mentioning is the built-in modem, which allowed players to use a special browser, download more content, and of course, compete in multiplayer. Such technical specifications secured the Dreamcast a successful launch in Japan, even considering Sega's tarnished reputation. The new console caused quite a stir, and the announcement of a full-fledged 3D platformer about Sonic only added to it. Although, even here, Sega managed to make two mistakes at once. The first one was the undersupply of Dreamcasts to meet the demand at the sales launch. It is today that all PS5 are sold out and the whole world will patiently wait, but back then, a delay meant losing the market. So, Sega urgently set up mass production of the consoles, which entailed a significant drop in quality. Subsequently, burned drives and power units casted a huge cloud over Dreamcast's success. The second mistake was the delay of the new Sonic, along with the much anticipated Sega Rally Championship 2. The games were released just a couple of weeks after the console, but this reduced an already modest launch lineup to just 4 titles and, naturally, upset the fans. Nonetheless, when Sonic Adventure did come out, it turned out to be astonishingly good. To begin with, the game had 6 playable characters with different controls and abilities, including 2 new ones to the series. They all took part in the main story, but playing as one of them revealed a different part of the plot. Each character also had different versions of game levels with different gameplay, varied and at times even unique bosses, and when rivaling characters clashed, it was possible to fight either side. The story itself has also evolved evolved significantly since the classic games of the series. Chaos Emeralds and Master Emerald, which previously acted only as sources of great energy and character superforms, turned out to be connected to a mighty ancient beast called Chaos.
You know nothing, fool! It's Chaos, the god of destruction!
Dr. Robotnik, who got his famous moniker Eggman, destroys the Master Emerald and unleashes chaos trapped within it. The story then focuses on the hero's search for the remaining emeralds, because if chaos absorbs them, it will become too powerful and extremely dangerous to the in-game world. And the world had plenty of space to run wild. The player could get to individual levels from one of the 3 impressive sized locations: Station Square City, Mystic Ruins, and Egg Carrier, Dr. Eggman's ship. Each of these locations had secrets like character upgrades and were interesting to explore in general. The game world also featured the Chow Gardens, tiny creatures that were remotely reminiscent of the Tamagotchi pets. Their gameplay was also the same. The player had to grow and feed them. By the way, Dreamcast's VMU allowed you to take care of Chow even away from the console, which quite literally turned them into Tamagotchis. The progress, of course, could be transferred to the console. To be frank, this particular aspect of the game never appealed that much to me, but the numerous rave reviews are hard to ignore. As a whole, Sonic Adventure not only sold successfully, but is still considered by many fans to be the best game in the series. The only game that was able to repeat such success was the sequel, Sonic Adventure 2. It had visibly improved graphics, new characters, and the plot became even more ambitious and intertwined. The core, however, remained the same. Eggman finds a new mighty creature, which turns out to be a hedgehog named Shadow, and together they are collecting Chaos Emeralds to take over the world. Instead of 6 different characters, we were given 2 teams, heroes and villains. Thus, their mutual story could be viewed from both sides. There were no locations between the levels, and the gameplay variability was reduced, but everything became much more dynamic. The game no longer looked like a lengthy leisure adventure. Now it was more like a very dynamic action, even when you had to thoroughly explore the level in search of various items. Because of all this, the sequel left an ambiguous aftertaste. Of course, in many ways it inherited and developed the ideas of the original, but for the most part, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 provided a different experience, and the debates about which part of the duology is better are relevant even today.
Oh, it's this great old TV show, and I was the star. See, now look at me. See, that's me.
This is weirding me out.
By the time Dreamcast was released in the US, the situation with the rather modest starting lineup had been fixed. It now offered 18 titles instead of 4. Moreover, the console's library received some truly great games. One of them was Soul Calibur, the sequel of Soul Edge fighting game, which was released back on PS1. Since it was developed by Namco, the company we're all familiar with, the game can be best described as Tekken with weapons. For example, the gameplay was classic. 2 characters in 2D perspective try to deplete each other's health bar, but using other things beside their bare hands. Combat-wise, it is worth noting the elaborated defensive technique which allowed to block hits, deflect them, and open the enemy for a blow, as well as the ability to move rather freely in all 8 directions on the arena. As any decent hit, Soul Calibur can be praised for outstanding graphics and animation for its time, wild dynamics, and captivating atmosphere. In short, a must-have, worth buying a Dreamcast. Another must-have was Shenmue, an open-world third-person action game. It seemed like this game was constantly displaying the capabilities of Dreamcast in every possible aspect. And no wonder, because Shenmue had a record-breaking budget of $70 million, what made it a great interactive movie. First and foremost, the game had mind-boggling life simulation. Just to remind you, it was 1999. In the evening, stores would close down. When it rained, people on the street would pull out their umbrellas or hide under some roof. You could chat with any NPC you meet. Of course, The game didn't exactly offer a great variety of topics for small talks, but even in many games of today, it's usually hard to find a talkative NPC. The player also could interact with the in-game world, just take the episodes with feeding a stray kitten. By the end of the first part, the protagonist was offered to take a picture and choose between two photos. In the second part, however, we got this episode when the protagonist recalls the events of the first part and shows the photo which the player had selected, as the game uses the save files. All these little things made Shenmue incredibly atmospheric. This was also helped by the graphics, maxed out to achieve the picture that was previously unattainable. As for the game's downsides, I would surprisingly name the very same atmosphere, because before you start the game, you have to understand that this is not an action game. The gameplay is smooth and meditative to the very routine. Yes, I'm talking about you boring ass fork truck. And it lacks truly wild moments. But as for the ability to relax and immerse yourself in a fascinating story, even today, Shenmue hardly knows any equals.
Stay with me for a while.
To take something more action-driven, let's say a few words about Jet Set Radio. It's a 3D action about roller skating gang wars. They fight for territory and reputation by leaving their graffiti. I bet you can already tell how cool this game wanted to be and how badly it wanted to appeal to the younger audience. Oddly enough, such cliches didn't spoil the game one bit. In fact, quite the opposite. Jet Set Radio is ridiculously good with its atmosphere. The acidic visual design and hilarious soundtrack only made it funnier. Speaking of graphics, this was the first game to implement cel shading, a technology that makes the game's graphics look hand-drawn. Thanks to cel shading, the whole environment looked a bit cartoonish and made it crystal clear that we are dealing with a game that couldn't be further from a dead serious title about gangster wars. That's what made the game so appealing, because having fun in a well-made goofy arcade is quite a rewarding experience.
Hey, come on over, have some fun with Crazy Taxi! Yeah!
Another Dreamcast hit, Crazy Taxi, had a similar effect. The title itself is a clear enough representation of what the game is all about. In this simulator, the player had to drive clients from point A to point B while performing stunts and making total mayhem on the road. And unlike in real life, the client won't complain about your stunts, but will instead reward you with generous tips. There was no story, the physics could be described as crazy at best, and graphics-wise, there was nothing outstanding, but the game didn't need all of that. Just like the previous game in our list, Crazy Taxi was more about arcade and fun without a hint of realism, so it was warmly welcomed for similar reasons. Besides, the initially low difficulty eventually forced you to dive into the intricacies of stunt performing, which only added to the immersion into the road madness. So the main thing I would point out about Dreamcast's greatest hits would be that they all were atmospheric and captivating. Taking into account the work that has been done to improve the console's architecture and restore Sega's reputation, the first console of the new 6th generation had every chance to claim its place on the market. Unfortunately, there was no miracle for two simple reasons. The first one is called PS1, which became everyone's favorite and was still a relevant platform. The second one ironically turned out to be PS2, with the release of which Sega's plans to once again get a foothold in the console wars became well and truly doomed. And although the company's management was now making less marketing mistakes, they were still making them. Eventually, Sega decided to switch to developing titles for all platforms, which made it the company we know today. Now, as always, I invite you to the comment section. Please tell us if you had the chance to play some games on Dreamcast and what are your memories about Sega. Also, while you're scrolling to the comments, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and smash the bell button. Stay tuned.